In the age of endless content, it's extremely rare for a piece of media to capture the attention of the masses. When this does happen, it's seen as a special event, an opportunity for the public to participate in a shared experience. The concept of monoculture is considered a novelty in today's world. But back in the 1990s, it was commonplace, existing as a weekly occurrence in the form of NBC's Thursday night programming block Must See TV. The block featured some of the most iconic sitcoms of all time, along with drama series that were hugely influential. At its peak, Must See TV was one of the most watched programming blocks of all time, with a weekly audience of over 40 million viewers. But its reign was not destined to last, as technological advancements and unwise programming choices hindered the block's relevance, eventually leading to its death. Back in the early 1980s, network television was king. The viewing public primarily tuned into three channels: ABC, CBS, and NBC. And among these three major networks, NBC had the lowest viewership, with none of their shows ranking within the top 10 of Nielsen ratings. While the network did have a few moderately successful shows, they were mostly holdovers from the 1970s, with NBC struggling to maintain relevance against its competitors. But things began to turn around in 1981, when Grant Tinker became the chairman and CEO of NBC. Tinker had previously run MTM Enterprises, a production company responsible for hits like The Mary Tyler Moore Show. And as the head honcho of NBC, Tinker's goal was for the network to focus on high-quality, smart series, aiming for Emmy Awards and critical acclaim. While it would be a steep upward climb, Tinker would be aided by his second-in-command, NBC's recently appointed entertainment president Brandon Tartikoff, an ambitious young executive known for his savvy ability to create a schedule. Under the leadership of this duo, a new era for NBC was about to begin. Despite its struggles, the network had one shining light on its schedule: a police procedural drama entitled Hill Street Blues. The series received rave critical reviews, being praised for its gritty depiction of crime and law enforcement, something rarely seen on television before. Airing on Thursday nights at 10 p.m., the show gained a modest but steady audience, so NBC decided to build off the show's cult following. In the fall of 1982, they would create an entire Thursday night programming block full of high-quality series. At 8 p.m., the network scheduled Fame, a musical drama entering its second season. In the 9 p.m. hour would be Taxi, an Emmy-winning comedy series about New York City taxi drivers, followed by Cheers, a new sitcom about the staff and customers of a Boston bar. NBC promoted their Thursday block as the best night of television on television, and with that, a 40-year tradition had begun. All of the shows on NBC's Thursday lineup received praise from television critics. But ratings-wise, the block was slow to take off, generating dismal viewership in its first few months. As a result, Taxi was pulled from its time slot in January, with Cheers moving to 9:30 and Gimme a Break being added to the block. But aside from Hill Street Blues, none of the shows on Thursday had gained much traction by the end of the 1982-1983 season, with the network pulling the plug on Fame. While Cheers' ratings were even lower than Fame's, it was undeniable that the show was one of the best on NBC's schedule. So Grant Tinker made the call to renew it, telling the press, "We should have been sent off to jail if we took it off." Keeping Cheers on Thursday, NBC added two more comedies to the 8 p.m. hour, creating a full 2-hour block of sitcoms to precede Hill Street Blues. But these new sitcoms didn't exactly live up to the high-quality brand that NBC was trying to build. So they continued to tinker with their Thursday schedule, most notably adding the series Family Ties, a sitcom about a family with differing political views that gave the block a smart, sophisticated edge. The block's overall ratings saw a slight increase thanks to these changes. But in general, the sitcom format was floundering in the early to mid-80s. Primetime soap operas were all the rage, and many critics were wondering if the sitcom was dead, as it no longer held the kind of cultural relevance it had in previous decades. It wasn't until fall of 1984 that NBC struck gold with an unbeatable lineup, which they dubbed the Night of Bests. The network premiered the new family sitcom The Cosby Show at 8 p.m., based on the life and stand-up act of comedian Bill Cosby. The show stood out for its portrayal of an upper-middle-class African-American family. This concept had been explored on television before, most notably on the sitcom The Jeffersons. But The Jeffersons was an adult-oriented series which regularly tackled serious social and political issues. The Cosby Show, on the other hand, was a more traditional family-friendly sitcom, a broad comedy that could appeal to viewers of all ages. And the series was an instant critical and ratings hit, with the rest of Thursday's programs benefiting heavily from its success. As Cosby hit number 3 in the ratings, Family Ties at 8:30 received a huge ratings bump, becoming the 5th highest-rated show in the country. And Cheers, whose audience had been gradually building season after season, also saw its ratings jump, leading into the new sitcom Night Court at 9:30 and Hill Street Blues at 10 p.m. Critics and audiences alike were very pleased by NBC's first-rate lineup, and over the next few seasons, the block's ratings grew exponentially. By 1986, Cosby had hit the number 1 slot in the ratings, reaching 28.9 million households every week. And as the show reportedly averaged 2.09 viewers per television set, it's safe to assume that Cosby was easily drawing in over 50 million individual viewers per episode. The Cosby effect was also felt beyond Thursdays, as NBC established a blockbuster lineup of highly rated sitcoms on Saturday, with the sitcom genre being revitalized after years of irrelevance. By 1987, NBC had the number 1, number 2, and number 3 most watched shows in the country, as Cheers had become a bona fide hit to match Cosby and Family Ties. Overall, Thursdays on NBC had become the highest-rated night on network television, propelling NBC to become the most watched network in America. This massive achievement certainly owed a lot to Brandon Tartikoff's talent for creating a schedule. But Tartikoff's leadership had drawn some criticism, with some scrutinizing his boisterous public persona, feeling that he took too much credit for the success of NBC's shows. In spite of any criticism, there was no question that NBC was thriving, with 11 of their shows occupying the ratings top 20. But the structure of NBC underwent a monumental change in the mid-1980s, when NBC's parent company RCA was acquired by General Electric for $6.4 billion. As a result of the sale, Grant Tinker stepped down as chairman, being replaced by GE executive Robert Wright. While Tinker had risen the ranks as a television producer, the new leaders of NBC had no direct experience with creating television, as the network was now under the control of a major multinational conglomerate. In the wake of these corporate shifts, Tartikoff held the reins over NBC's programming, with its familiar lineup of Thursday shows continuing to dominate. However, in the fall of 1987, NBC broke the lineup by moving Family Ties to Sunday nights, giving the 8:30 time slot to the new Cosby Show spinoff A Different World. And as Hill Street Blues concluded its 7-season run, the show's co-creator Stephen Baccio created a new series at 10 p.m. called LA Law, a legal drama that combined serious social issues with black humor. While both of these shows quickly became hits, the block did have a weak point in the 9:30 time slot. After moving Night Court to Wednesdays, the network had tried out multiple sitcoms in its place, with none able to retain Cheers' now massive audience. But besides this small blight, NBC's Thursday night was unbeatable through the end of the 1980s. By the dawn of the 90s, however, NBC was losing its footing. In the fall of 1990, the fledgling Fox network took aim at NBC's Thursday lineup, moving its breakout hit The Simpsons to Thursdays at 8 p.m. Fox had been launched by News Corporation in 1986, as a fourth network designed to compete with ABC, NBC, and CBS. But to differentiate itself, Fox focused on edgy programming that was geared toward younger viewers, premiering The Simpsons as a regular half-hour series in 1989. During its first season, the animated sitcom had made waves, becoming the first primetime animated hit in years and Fox's highest-rated series. Against The Simpsons, Cosby's ratings took a hit, falling from number 1 to number 5 and never fully recovering its audience. And in 1991, NBC lost Brandon Tartikoff, as the scheduling savant resigned from the company to become the president of Paramount Pictures. Despite these challenges, Cheers continued its ratings ascension, becoming the #1 show in America by 1991. But the tentpole sitcoms of Thursday were aging, and NBC was struggling to find another hit. New sitcoms were gradually brought into the mix on Thursdays. Wings, created by a team of Cheers writers, was about pilots at a small airport in Nantucket. And Seinfeld, based on the stand-up act of comedian Jerry Seinfeld, was a show about nothing, following the exploits of 4 New Yorkers as they navigated the mundane challenges of everyday life. Despite these sitcoms showing some promise in the ratings, neither had the kind of blockbuster audience commanded by The Cosby Show and Cheers. After Cosby ended in spring of 1992, NBC moved A Different World to 8 p.m., adding the new series, Rhythm and Blues, at 8:30. And while A Different World had paired well with Cosby, the show proved to be an ill-suited choice to open the block. Ratings for the 8 p.m. hour plummeted, with The Simpsons beating NBC in the time slot. And while Cheers remained a top-rated series, star Ted Danson had decided to leave, meaning the show would be coming to an end after 11 seasons. NBC was already in trouble, having fallen back to 3rd place in overall ratings by 1992. And with the network losing its only top 10 show, NBC was in danger of losing everything it had built over the previous decade. But the network was not about to give up. Entering into the fall of 1993, NBC would devise a plan to rebrand its Thursday block with a new name and an updated image, which would catapult the network to new heights that few could have imagined. In May of 1993, NBC aired the series finale of Cheers to an estimated audience of 93 million viewers, one of the highest-rated telecasts in television history. The beloved series would be missed by audiences, and the TV landscape was rapidly shifting. With the rise of cable television and home video formats, overall viewership for the major networks was in decline, as audiences were becoming fractured between a growing number of channels. As a result, networks were starting to focus less on overall viewership and more on demographics, as the 18 to 49-year-old age group became the most sought-after demographic for advertisers. If NBC was going to succeed, it would not only have to reach the masses, but also appeal particularly to younger viewers. Despite these challenges, NBC's new president, Warren Littlefield, vowed to rebuild the network's Thursday block, promising more sitcoms with recognizable names as a means of boosting viewership. Ultimately, NBC would stick to its formula of 4 comedies and a drama on Thursday, but would distinguish the night by giving it an official name, Must See TV. At 8 p.m., the network would air Mad About You, a vehicle for comedian Paul Reiser entering its 2nd season. The show followed the trials and tribulations of a married couple living in New York City, often tackling adult themes and plots. And while this wouldn't be the first series of this ilk, the scheduling of Mad About You at 8 p.m. was considered a bold move, as the 8 o'clock hour had traditionally been considered the family hour, a place for clean shows with family-friendly themes. But NBC had broken this tradition in the spring of 1993, airing Cheers reruns at 8 p.m. to great ratings success. This convinced the network that adult-oriented shows could work in this time slot, and Mad About You's scheduling at 8 p.m. would further test this theory. At 8:30, the network would air Wings, followed by Seinfeld at 9 p.m., which had steadily grown in audience over the past 4 years. Following Seinfeld at 9:30, NBC would premiere a brand new spin-off of Cheers entitled Frasier, which followed Kelsey Grammer's character as he moved from Boston to Seattle to host a radio show. As audiences had become well acquainted with the Frasier character through Cheers, the show would be the first major test of Warren Littlefield's new strategy of using recognizable names to draw in viewers. Rounding out the schedule, LA Law would air at 10 p.m., still critically acclaimed but entering its 8th and final season. Keeping in line with previous seasons, NBC would promote the entire block as a single viewing event, creating new logos and jingles to entice audiences to Thursdays.
Thursday's gotta get home for NBC's Must See TV.
NBC also pioneered new ways to keep audiences from changing the channel between shows. Instead of airing the full credit sequence at the end of each episode, NBC would side-screen the credits and air them alongside the show's concluding scene, creating a seamless transition between shows that kept audiences watching. Despite losing Cheers, the prospects for NBC's new lineup were promising. Upon its premiere week, must-see TV scored huge numbers, with Seinfeld and Frasier tied at number 3 for the week. While Wings and Mad About You scored slightly lower, the block was already showing huge improvement over the previous season, and it appeared that NBC's new branding for Thursdays was paying off big time. By the end of the 1993-1994 television season, must-see TV was an undeniable success, with Seinfeld and Frasier finishing out in the top 10. While Wings and Mad About You ranked at number 17 and number 35 respectively, their ratings had notably improved over the previous season. And with the network's adult-oriented comedies doing well at 8 p.m., NBC had proven that the era of the family hour was over, with a new era of fresh, edgy comedies just beginning. Ratings for Thursdays were up significantly, but overall, NBC was still in third place, lagging behind CBS and ABC. And if they wanted to be back at number 1, they would need to expand their ratings dominance beyond Thursdays. One of ABC's most popular nights was Tuesdays, where they aired a sitcom block featuring the likes of Roseanne and Full House. But the aging sitcoms were seeing their ratings gradually slip, so NBC decided to strike. In the fall of 1994, the network moved both Wings and Frasier to Tuesday nights. The John Larroquette Show and the Martin Short Show were added to round out the schedule, and NBC utilized a promotional campaign that promoted Tuesday as the second night of must-see TV, attempting to generate the same hype it had previously done for Thursday. Back on Thursdays, the network debuted 2 new sitcoms, Madman of the People and Friends, along with a new hour-long drama series at 10 p.m. entitled ER. Friends followed the adventures of 6 friends living in Manhattan, while Madman of the People starred Dabney Coleman as an aging columnist struggling to maintain his relevancy. ER was a medical drama created by author Michael Crichton, following the inner workings of a hospital emergency room in Chicago. And with 3 new series to bolster its Thursday block, the network amped up its marketing strategy. One week featured a crossover episode, in which the characters on Friends met with characters from Mad About You and ER. Another week of the block was promoted as Blackout Thursday, in which all of the night's episodes, aside from Seinfeld, featured plots about power outages. This continuity building between shows was a success, and it appeared that the network could do no wrong, with all of the shows in the block gaining huge numbers. But the block did have a weak link. Despite becoming a top 10 show, Madman of the People was losing a quarter of Seinfeld's massive audience, and as the threshold for success was becoming extremely high, the show was pulled from its time slot in January of 1995 and later canceled. Aside from this small blunder, must-see TV was quickly becoming a massive event, with the block overall averaging 40 million viewers a week. But the network was not interested in keeping its Thursday schedule stagnant, and it vowed not to make the same mistakes it had made in the past. Back in the 1980s, the network had taken a hands-off approach to Thursdays, leaving its schedule relatively untouched for several years. And while the ratings remained high, the network failed to establish enough new sitcoms to replace the old ones, leaving them in a desperate state once their most popular sitcoms ended. To avoid this, NBC would employ a new launching pad strategy. Its biggest hits would be anchored at 8 p.m. and 9 p.m. to hold down the block, while the 8:30 and 9:30 slots would be more fluid, a breeding ground for new shows to build an audience before being moved to another night. As Friends had proven itself with high, stable ratings, the series was moved to 8 p.m. on Thursdays, while Seinfeld and ER would remain at 9 p.m. and 10 p.m. respectively. Any sitcom scheduled after Friends or Seinfeld was guaranteed to receive huge ratings, so new shows would be scheduled in those slots to achieve maximum exposure. Then, after a year or two, NBC would move the shows to a different night of the week, in hopes that the audience built on Thursdays would follow. In addition to Tuesdays and Thursdays, NBC anointed Sundays as the third night of must-see TV, moving Mad About You to 8 p.m. to anchor a new block of sitcoms. With 3 nights of must-see TV per week, NBC decided that the block's new shows would follow a similar theme to the existing ones to create more cohesion. Seinfeld and Friends were both shows about singles living in New York City, so naturally, NBC decided that this would be must-see TV's brand: upscale adult urban comedies about white-collar characters living in major metropolitan areas, featuring plotlines centered around dating, careers, and city life. With this theming in mind, in the fall of 1995, NBC debuted The Single Guy and Caroline in the City in the Launchpad time slots. Both sitcoms fit the bill, following the exploits of young singles living in New York City. And commercially, the strategy paid off, with both series consistently hitting the top 5 in the ratings. By the spring of 1996, NBC had officially retaken its crown as the #1 most watched network in America, having repeated its success in the 80s by creating a killer Thursday lineup that ruled the airwaves. And while ABC was still dominating Tuesdays, NBC's second night of must-see TV was also holding its own, with the science fiction comedy Third Rock from the Sun becoming a sleeper hit in the spring of 1996. But there was one major problem with must-see TV. Both The Single Guy and Caroline in the City were eviscerated by critics, who saw them as shallow rehashes of NBC's more successful sitcoms. In response to this, in the fall of 1996, The Single Guy underwent a creative retooling, with the producers hoping to correct many of the problems that critics had pointed out. Caroline in the City, on the other hand, was moved from Thursdays to Tuesday nights following Frasier. The network also debuted a third sitcom block of must-see TV on Wednesdays, featuring 4 sitcoms followed by an hour-long drama at 10 p.m. In addition to expanding the branding to another night, Wednesdays would provide another permanent home for the sitcoms launched on Thursdays. While Thursday nights were the big leagues that every show wanted to be on, Warren Littlefield told the press they know they have short-term leases, not long-term leases. And true to that promise, the network shook up their Thursday schedule countless times during the following years, scheduling sitcoms like Hope and Gloria, Boston Common, Suddenly Susan, The Naked Truth, and Fired Up in the Launchpad time slots. Nearly all of these shows achieved blockbuster ratings thanks to their popular lead-ins. But virtually all of these shows were panned by critics for failing to live up to the standards set by Seinfeld and Friends. And after being moved from Thursdays to stand on their own, the shows all eventually fell into obscurity, seeing their ratings plummet along with their relevancy. While audiences would tolerate these shows as filler, their true loyalty lied with Friends, Seinfeld, and ER. And while the ratings for these shows remained high, NBC was about to receive a huge blow to its Thursday block. Despite facing some challenges with the Launchpad time slots, by spring of 1997, NBC became the most watched network among viewers 18 to 49, in addition to being #1 in total viewers. The network's must-see TV branding was clearly appealing to younger viewers, so in the fall of 1997, they debuted yet another sitcom block on Mondays, which the critics quickly dubbed as Must-She TV. The new block would feature 4 female-centric shows, all of which had aired at some point during Thursday's block. And the network now had 18 sitcoms on the schedule, with 5 nights a week dedicated to the same theme. But the entire concept of must-see TV was becoming diluted, and audiences were no longer buying into the marketing gimmick. Must-She TV's low ratings reflected this, with the block being abandoned after just 1 season. The Wednesday edition of Must-See TV was also struggling, and it appeared that the network had overextended itself. To make matters worse, in December of 1997, it was announced that Seinfeld would be ending in May after 9 seasons. The show was more popular than ever, by this point being the most watched series on television and averaging 35 million viewers an episode. And the sitcom was NBC's biggest asset by far, generating $200 million a year for the network. But Jerry Seinfeld felt the show had run out of creative steam, as he turned down a whopping $110 million paycheck to return for a 10th season. This turn of events spelled big problems for must-see TV. While ER and Friends were solid hits, the network's Thursday lineup was still incredibly lopsided, as they had failed to launch any major hits since 1994. And the threshold for success was extremely high, with many shows hitting the top 10 but still being canceled. Amidst this major loss, it was announced that NBC president Warren Littlefield would be stepping down after 9 years. Littlefield's legacy with the company had been complicated. His strategy of casting familiar personalities in sitcoms had produced some positive results, but it also created a wave of shows that had nothing to offer beyond a famous star, as celebrities with no comedy experience were cast as sitcom leads, often with disastrous results. In any case, Littlefield had overseen the revitalization of NBC's Thursday night block. And with the network losing its biggest show, his absence would come at an incredibly vulnerable time. Ultimately, Seinfeld's departure would be softened by the return of Frasier to Thursday nights, as the sitcom took Seinfeld's place at 9 p.m. in fall of 1998. Following it at 9:30 would be Veronica's Closet, which had amassed a sizable audience after Seinfeld the previous season. And by the spring of 1999, despite losing Seinfeld, Must-See TV was on solid ground, with all of the series in the block landing in the top 10, and ER becoming TV's most watched series. But overall, the network's ratings were declining. NBC had slipped from number 1 to number 2 in average viewership. And while Must-See TV was still dominating its time slot, the block continued to receive criticism for its uneven quality. While sitcoms like Jessie and Veronica's Closet had achieved ratings success in their launchpad time slots, both shows were lambasted for their mediocrity, failing to live up to what the block promised and failing to hold their own in other time slots. Once occupying 5 nights of the week, Must-See TV had been whittled down to just Tuesdays and Thursdays, as the sitcom boom of the 1990s was finally cooling off. And in the year 2000, things took a turn for the worse when NBC lost its Thursday supremacy for the first time, as ABC scheduled their new primetime game show Who Wants to Be a Millionaire opposite Must-See TV. The series was based on a British show of the same name, and garnered a buzz for being the first US game show to offer a $1 million prize. Millionaire premiered over the summer of 1999 and became a sleeper hit, with ABC expanding the show to air 7 nights a week. Its Thursday edition aired opposite Frasier, which took a hit in the ratings thanks to this competition and was eventually moved back to Tuesdays. And while Friends was still holding strong at 8 p.m., the show would face its first real test in January of 2001, when CBS decided to move its breakout show Survivor to Thursdays at 8 p.m. The first season of the reality series had aired on Wednesdays during the summer of 2000, and had unexpectedly become a huge hit, drawing in 50 million viewers to its finale. By moving the show to Thursdays against Friends, CBS was giving the hit sitcom a run for its money. Ultimately, Friends' audience would hold steady, but Survivor became the number 1 most watched show in America, with its lead-out, CSI, also beating NBC at 9 p.m. NBC was no longer the place to be on Thursday nights, and while their scripted offerings had developed loyal followings, they simply could not compete with the flood of flashy reality-style programs taking over the networks. Shows that garnered huge ratings thanks to their cutting-edge and often sensationalistic approaches. As this tide was shifting, NBC gained new leadership, with Jeff Zucker being named as NBC Entertainment President in January of 2001. The pressure was on for Zucker to follow the reality competition trend. Though the network did venture into this territory through shows like Fear Factor and The Weakest Link, Zucker publicly said that the network's focus would continue to be on dramas and sitcoms. As the Tuesday sitcom block was now struggling, Frasier was moved back to anchor the night, with Will and Grace taking its place on Thursday. The show was one of the first prominent series to feature gay lead characters, and though its ratings had struggled in its first 2 seasons, Will and Grace hit its stride after being moved to Thursdays, becoming a top 10 show by 2002. As the novelty of reality shows was beginning to wane, NBC saw its investment in scripted programming pay off, with Friends becoming a number 1 show, and the network overall beating ABC and CBS in viewership. But NBC's good fortune would not last, and they would soon relent to the reality TV trend, making a bold move that would fundamentally change their Thursday block. While Must-See TV had survived the reality television era, NBC was still struggling to find shows for the 8:30 and 9:30 time slots on Thursdays. While Just Shoot Me had become a top 20 hit at 9:30 following Will and Grace, the show's performance was not up to par with NBC's high expectations, with the network rescheduling the series 12 times during its 7-season run. The post-Friends time slot also continued to be problematic. From 1995 to 2002, the network had tried 11 different sitcoms in the time slot, and by spring of 2002, NBC had resorted to airing reruns of Friends at 8:30, a grave sign that the network was out of ideas. But there was a glimmer of hope, as a new format was taking the networks by storm. Up until the late 90s, the vast majority of network sitcoms employed a multi-camera approach, being filmed on a soundstage before a live audience or utilizing a canned laugh track.
I got a lot of problems with you people. Now, you're gonna hear about it.
Meanwhile, on cable TV, channels were experimenting with single-camera comedies, shows that were often shot on location with no laugh track. These shows had a cinematic quality to them, with HBO shows like The Larry Sanders Show and Curb Your Enthusiasm becoming highly critically acclaimed and developing cult followings. After Malcolm in the Middle became a breakout hit for the Fox network in the year 2000, more broadcast networks began dipping their toes into this format, with NBC putting on Scrubs, a single-camera comedy following the resident staff of a hospital. The series premiered after Frasier on Tuesdays, and while ratings were modest, the show received positive critical reviews, exceeding the majority of sitcoms that NBC had scheduled on Thursdays. Scrubs was innovative and original, featuring a cast of young comedic talents, and the show looked like a good fit for Thursdays. But the network reportedly had qualms about scheduling it after Friends. The 8:30 time slot had developed a reputation amongst the press and public as being cursed, a dumping ground for NBC to schedule mediocre programming in the hopes that no one would notice. The network feared that no show would ever succeed in the post-Friends time slot. But with Scrubs gaining a dedicated following during its first season, NBC trepidly moved the show to Thursdays in fall of 2002. And thanks to the Friends lead-in, Scrubs saw its ratings double, hitting 22 million viewers for its second season premiere. But unsurprisingly, the series was not able to retain Friends' massive audience, with its ratings consistently declining over the next 18 months. Scrubs was eventually moved back to Tuesdays, and it appeared that NBC's fears had been validated, that no show could ever succeed in the post-Friends time slot. To make matters worse, in the fall of 2003, both Friends and Frasier entered into their final seasons. Friends had been holding down Thursdays since Seinfeld ended in 1998, and on Tuesdays, Frasier was the network's most popular sitcom by far. More than ever, the pressure was on for NBC to find a new hit. The network played it safe with the new show Coupling, an American adaptation of a British sitcom that, similar to Friends, followed the dating lives of 6 friends. But the show was a critical and ratings bomb, and following its failure, NBC broke its 20-year tradition of scheduling 4 sitcoms on Thursday nights, as it premiered the brand new hour-long reality series The Apprentice at 9 p.m. NBC had enlisted Survivor producer Mark Burnett to create The Apprentice as a vehicle for real estate mogul Donald Trump, who would serve as the host of the series. The Apprentice was a competition series that saw 16 contestants engaging in various business-oriented challenges, competing to win a $250,000 contract with Trump's company. With the American viewing public still enamored with reality shows, The Apprentice's first season averaged 20 million viewers, reaching the number 7 slot in the ratings. Thanks to The Apprentice, must-see TV's 9 p.m. hour was solid, but with Friends ending, NBC would need to find a new show for 8 p.m. So the network debuted a spin-off of Friends entitled Joey, starring Matt LeBlanc reprising his famous role. By taking a character from an ensemble and making them the lead of their own series, the network was attempting to repeat the success of Frasier a decade earlier. But without his 5 co-stars, LeBlanc's solo vehicle failed miserably, being torn apart by critics and seeing its ratings tumble to just 7 million viewers, a fraction of Friends' massive audience.
Jeez, you defecate on one corpse.
Must-see TV's relevance always lied in the fact that it was setting new trends rather than following them. But by the mid-2000s, this was no longer the case, with the block utilizing every gimmick it could to survive. While The Apprentice had started out strong, the show's ratings slipped during its second season, and with ER's ratings also declining, for the first time in 20 years, not a single show on NBC's Thursday night was in the top 10. Overall, the television industry was drastically changing. Cable television continued to grow in popularity, with audiences becoming splintered between hundreds of different channels. The rise of digital video recorders, or DVRs, was also cutting into the big networks' ratings, as viewers could now easily record shows and watch them back at their convenience, fast-forwarding through commercials. While network shows were still receiving high ratings, reality shows had become the norm, with American Idol becoming the nation's top-rated show and nearly every network reducing its scripted programming in favor of unscripted series. And with the cultural relevance of sitcoms declining in favor of reality shows, NBC eliminated its 8 p.m. hour of sitcoms on Tuesdays in favor of unscripted programming, leaving the network with only 4 sitcoms on its schedule. Must-see TV had hit rock bottom, and NBC had slipped from first place to fourth place in the coveted 18 to 49 demographic. By 2006, Joey had been canceled after a dismal 2-season run, and The Apprentice was moved to Monday nights. With Will and Grace and ER being the only holdovers from its peak, the block trudged forward for several more months, introducing the new multi-camera sitcom Four Kings and moving 2 existing shows to Thursday nights, My Name is Earl and The Office. The latter 2 sitcoms were of a new breed for NBC, following in the footsteps of Scrubs by breaking many of the typical conventions of the sitcom genre. Their ratings were mediocre at best, but the shows were praised for their innovativeness, drawing in a small but extremely loyal audience of dedicated viewers. Unfortunately, critical acclaim and legacy couldn't save Must-See TV. The block's title had become outdated and irrelevant, with technologies like DVDs, DVRs, and digital downloads allowing viewers to watch TV episodes at their leisure. As viewers no longer felt the urgency to watch episodes live during their premieres, the pull behind Must-See TV was gone. In fall of 2006, the Must-See TV branding was dropped completely by the network, with Thursday night being rebranded as Comedy Night Done Right. While ER would stay firm in the 10 p.m. slot, My Name is Earl and The Office would be joined by Scrubs, along with the newcomer 30 Rock. And for the first time in decades, NBC had 4 sitcoms on the Thursday schedule that were highly praised and respected, finally living up to the goal that Must-See TV had always aimed for. The shows were able to stay afloat thanks to their popularity with younger viewers, with The Office in particular becoming the 11th most watched show in the 18 to 49 demographic. But in terms of overall viewership, the shows of Thursday would never come close to matching its peak, as audiences continued to flee broadcast television for other formats. In 2009, ER concluded after a 15-season run, with the network losing its biggest Thursday show and the last holdover from its peak era. Sans ER, NBC's Thursday comedy block continued for several years under different names, introducing fan favorites like Community and Parks and Recreation. But these shows were never big ratings hits for NBC, instead growing audiences thanks to their availability on streaming services. As linear network television became increasingly irrelevant, losing its viewers to services like Netflix and Hulu, NBC fully abandoned their Thursday sitcom tradition in 2015, scheduling reality shows and dramas in the 8 to 10 p.m. time slots. By the 2010s, Must-See TV was ancient history. But in 2017, NBC inexplicably resurrected the Must-See TV branding, as Will and Grace returned to the airwaves with new episodes after an 11-year hiatus. The rebooted block was a return to form, as 4 sitcoms were paired with the procedural drama Chicago Fire at 10 p.m. And the block performed decently, with Will and Grace and Chicago Fire drawing in respectable ratings. But the threshold for success had dropped significantly in the decade that Must-See TV had been on hiatus. The term Must-See TV had been developed at a time when viewers had to tune into a specific channel at a certain time to watch a given program, forcing them to make choices and prioritize certain shows and networks over others. Branding Thursday night as Must-See TV was an ingenious marketing tool, as it signaled to audiences that by not tuning in, they would be missing out on something special. But in the modern age, the idea of missing a program had been made obsolete thanks to on-demand viewing options. And the idea of watching an entire lineup of shows on one particular network was now a foreign concept to the average viewer, as streaming services had filled the cultural void once held by television networks. While the block had consistently drawn 40 million viewers in its heyday, the 2010s version of Must-See TV was lucky to get 3 million. And in 2021, NBC finally canceled the block for good. The rise and fall of Must-See TV was concurrent with the cultural peak of network television, a format which had been ubiquitous since the dawn of television but fell out of favor as technology advanced. And while Must-See TV's demise was likely unavoidable, NBC is certainly responsible for many of the missteps which contributed to its downfall. The network's failure to consistently deliver shows that lived up to the block's title proved to be the bane of their existence, as viewers were promised greatness but often received mediocrity. There's no doubt that creating a hit sitcom is an incredibly difficult task, requiring a rare combination of talent, originality, and timing. But the network's impatience and frequent mixing up of its schedule became a huge liability. While Cheers and Seinfeld both became #1 shows, both of these series were ratings duds in their early seasons. But because NBC believed in the quality of these shows, they were spared from cancellation and given the opportunity to grow, eventually developing huge audiences. During the peak of must-see TV, critical hits like News Radio, Third Rock from the Sun, Just Shoot Me, and Scrubs all showed great potential. But the shows were all hindered by NBC's unrealistically high expectations, becoming casualties of the network's detrimental habit of messing with its schedule.
No, News Radio is moving to Wednesday.
Hello, friends. Hello, ER.
No, that's Thursday. News Radio is moving to Wednesday.
Instead of allowing these fan-favorite shows time to grow in the launchpad time slots, NBC gave their most coveted Thursday time slots to low-quality copycat shows, sitcoms that looked and felt similar to Friends and Seinfeld but didn't have enough substance to stand on their own. And when NBC finally did start taking chances on more innovative shows, audiences had given up on the block as a whole, being pulled away from network television by an ever-increasing number of cable channels. NBC also failed to understand the concept of supply and demand. As they tried to expand must-see TV to other nights, the branding became diluted, and the moniker lost its meaning, becoming just another corporate ploy to gain eyeballs. Ultimately, audiences weren't tuning in to Thursday nights because of branding. They were tuning in to see the shows that they loved. No amount of marketing could compensate for smart writing, relatable characters, and brilliant comedic performances. And while developing a successful sitcom may be like catching lightning in a bottle, NBC proved that it was possible, airing some of the most memorable comedy programs of all time. Despite its demise, must-see TV remains the pinnacle of network television's cultural power, a symbol of an era which can never be recaptured, in which Americans participated in a monoculture, a common experience which connected viewers of all different backgrounds. While many of the series have deservedly fallen into obscurity, the ones that succeeded are still monumental cultural touchstones, entertaining millions of fans to this day. In this way, the legacy of must-see TV lives on, but there's no doubt that the cultural relevance that network television once held has shifted to streaming services and YouTube channels. Channels like this one can't exist without the support of viewers like you. So if you enjoyed this video and would like to see more content like this, please consider subscribing. And if you'd like to provide extra support, please consider joining my Patreon, in which you'll receive updates on future videos and 24-hour early access to new videos released. To join, you can find the link in the description.